Good morning, all. I know some of you, but not all of you in the room. My name is Sean Leonard. I'm Director of the Wild Trout Trust, and a huge welcome to Waddow. This is our annual get-together. This year it's with the Ribble Rivers Trust, and it's brilliant to see you all and to see your rivers. I wonder if you'd just join me in congratulating my wife on our 29th wedding anniversary. She's 256 miles away. She's not that impressed. This is the third year running I've done this, and it'll be the last year I do this. So, let's start with a little bit of domestics, I guess, just before we get into the meat of the day. Just thanks again to the guys from Ribble. They've done us a brilliant job. Some of the local clubs have been superb. Bowling Game, Manchester Anglers, and some of you are going to test their waters tomorrow, I believe. We've had great support from the EA with Mark Rudd, and especially Mark Rudd volunteering Neil Handy to speak, which he's really pleased about, a bit like my wife. And to all the speakers. So we've got I think a really interesting group of speakers, and I hope you'll agree as we go through the morning. And to you guys for turning up, just to reiterate that point. We've also had some good support, in fact brilliant support, generous support from United Utilities, who've offset some of the costs because, as I will explain shortly, we are a charity and we try to do everything on a shoestring. So United Utilities have stepped in and been very generous in support. Right, so here's my talk, what's up, what WTT's been doing for the last 12 months or so since we last met down south on the Chess. So just the absolute basics about what WTT is. We are a conservation charity. We have a membership. It's fairly flat. It's about 2,500 people. Has been thus for probably a decade. But we are all of a like mind. We're all fishermen, although our primary driver is conservation. We employ now 10 people in various bits and bobs. 7 people effectively full-time and 3 part-timers, so quite a lot of mouths to feed, and hopefully you'll see in a second the important people, the conservation officers, are doing an awful lot of work around the country. And that's our mission, to conserve, protect and restore habitats for wild trout. That's what we do, or attempt to do, in a nutshell. So this is what we've done, the nitty-gritty of our year. The bread and butter of what we do is advisory visits. So this is the conservation officers, as I said, there are 6 of them, going out with fishing clubs, landowners, maybe groups of conservation volunteers, and just talking about what's good and bad habitat and what those clubs could do to try and make life better for the trout and the other things in and around the river. And one of the things that we're always quite delighted with is that 4 out of 5 advisory visits turn into stuff in the river. Advice is all very well if it's, what use is it if it doesn't do something? So I do an audit at the end of the year of the previous year's advisory visits, and in 4 out of 5 cases, the clubs or whatever have actually enacted at least some of the advice. In other instances where that advice hasn't been enacted, there are some tricky barriers like land use, maybe getting consent from the regulatory authority, that kind of stuff. We've also done something like 35 practical demonstration events, and they would vary in duration from a day through to 2 weeks. And I'll show you some of this stuff just in a second. And they've been scattered geographically from the southwest of England to most recently the west coast of Scotland. And we've also got running something like 32 projects. And again, they've got an enormous geographical spread. And I've just tried to zigzag up the mainland of Britain to demonstrate where they're happening. So from down in the southwest in Somerset, I'll show you that pictorially in just a second, right up to Argyll, and again I'll show you that pictorially in just a second as well. So that's been the bones of what we've done really. So let's just look at some examples. So an advisory visit is where, in this case, Gareth came out with the bowling game guys, as you can see, a few weeks ago. He walked the river with them, and he produces a report that outlines the issues that he sees. For example, very heavy grazing right to the river's edge that makes it look like a lawn. And then he talks through some recommendations of what could be done. So his report, for example, talks about the use of fencing and pasture pumps, including the Ribble solar powered affairs here. Various pointers, we can choose which ones we go for. We have, Tim's going to love seeing this, we've got another type of service, if you will, which is a project proposal, and that again would entail a conservation officer going out with the club, but the report that he produces is somewhat more detailed, and so it itemises what could be done where in or around the river. So this is one that Tim did earlier in the year in Staffordshire. That is the Endham Brook, which is looking incredibly like a ditch. And Tim's project proposal identified areas on a map where stuff could happen in the river. His proposal produces a series of cross-sections, and he demonstrates exactly where on the river some features could be put in. This can then go with the flood defence consent to the Environment Agency in England, and hopefully gain consent for the club, working with us to then get on and do the work. So that's the intention. All of this work, that's not true, most of this work is funded through the Environment Agency. And we have a fantastically supportive arrangement using our ROD licence money to fund quite a lot of this work. So if you ever wonder what happens to my ROD licence money, this is it, at least in part. And then the third thing we do are these practical demonstration days. As I said earlier on, we've done 35 odd demo events over the last 12 months. And here is an example. That is what in Somerset they call a river. That is the River Avil, which drains into the Bristol Channel. It is actually, in some parts, it's a really pretty little stream, but the solution to any water problems in Somerset is to do that to your river. So our colleague Mike Blackmore, who's currently on his honeymoon, went in with a group of volunteers. We scrounged some money out of the local Environment Agency, some from the Crown Estates, to put into a project pot. And Mike went in with groups of volunteers. These are Environment Agency staff, students from Bridgewater College, just to try and make that very, very trapezoidal straight ditch into something more attractive. And that's what the stream looks like now. So that's pretty much the same beat as you saw earlier on. And lo and behold, these things have started to return. This work was done in March. Okay? So this is very, very recent shot. And also, these things have shown up in surveys. So that's quite interesting. This isn't science. This is an Environment Agency pre and post survey, electrofishing survey, from that very site that you saw. And you can see that, or maybe you can see, before the work was done, April last year, there were no brown trout found in the survey. And April of this year, 10 fish, including that little sea trout, showed up in the surveys. Now, it isn't science, but it's a nice bit of support for the work that was done. The total project pot for that work was £2,000, and Mike did about 700 metres of river, as you saw there earlier on, for £2,000, which isn't bad. Right, Paul. This is a video. It's not my Paul's going to make it work, aren't you?
So it just starts slowly with a couple of pre-shots, and then it kind of cycles through a bit quicker.
Oh, ye of little faith.
So what happened?
It works.
So that's before, that's the after, with the supportive planting and everything like that, and then how we got from the first slide to the second slide was like this. Pre-works, stone toe work in the toe of the bank there. Created some pools, created some brash cover. EA volunteers shoveling gravel in. We put 20 tonnes of gravel into the river. Hundreds of sedge plants, spawning riffles, LWD, and got to that. In a matter of a couple of months. So, big win.
Excellent, thank you. So that, as Paul alluded to, that again demonstrates one of the things that I think we're very good at, which is this idea of working with others. In that case, it was Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, the Environment Agency and Groundworks that affected that project in, as Paul said, a couple of months. So the third demo I was going to give you was just to flit up to this Argyll workshop. So this again was a 3-day event that happened 2 weeks ago. Alan, was it? 3, yes, okay. Which was some money that we scrounged out of a European project called IBIS, administered by the Lochs Agency in Northern Ireland. Slightly convoluted route. But anyway, they funded a 3-day event which we ran with Argyll Fisheries Trust on the west coast of Scotland. And it got together people from statutory agencies in Scotland, people from other fisheries trusts. So, for example, this is Kenny Galt from the River Tweed, who's a fisheries biologist. And it's got Gareth and Johnny Gray talking through examples of good habitat, what could be done to make life better for trout and other fishes, in fact, and then just getting on and doing the work as a demonstration event. So you can see, again, look at that, there's a classic sort of forestry drains, straight as an arrow and heavily incised and just hostile until they're made more complex with little bits of wood and the like. But also, the conservation officers have done some really, for us, fairly major scale projects this year. And I've just thrown together a couple of examples. So these are where the conservation officers will work with local groups to get significant projects done in the river. Okay, so here are 2 examples. I've flitted off to the River Lark, where Andy Thomas came off the subs bench to replace a very famous river restorer called Dr. Nigel Holmes, who tragically died last year, in the autumn of last year. And so Andy subbed in to deliver this project with the Lark Angling and Preservation Society. Is that right, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that's what the Lark looks like in bits. It's not all look like that, does it? No. But you can. This is a Suffolk chalk stream, by the way, and has been used and abused, and continues to be used and abused with abstraction, with pollution, and as you can see, with historic dredging. So Andy project managed a piece of work that was funded through the Environment Agency locally, brilliant Environment Agency officer on the ground, creating big soggy berms. So this is stuff that's just pushed in to create a big berm here, pinch the channel in, push it over to the far side, get it active again. So instead of that dead straight uniform, what looks like you might trot a float through for a chub becomes something that's a little bit more trouty. And then using a technique called dig and dump to introduce pools and gravel throats to those pools. The thing that was critical about this was having incredibly driven people on the ground, and Glenn Smithson, the guy on the left, is amongst us today, and that's the river that they have been left with, at least in this reach, after the work, something that starts to look much more like a trout stream. The guy on the right is called Tim Taylor, and he's one of those people, you know them, who knows this river like the back of his hand. So you can't appreciate from the photograph, but that is Tim Taylor, who knows this river like the back of his hand, having taken a dive in that river. That's him just emerging. And then my second example is to also stay in East Anglia, but on the River Glaven. And this is a project that Tim Jacklin project managed, again using Environment Agency funding, to put a channel around an online lake. This is rather deceptive because this is the channel built. But if you could imagine from this aerial shot that channel is not there. The River Glaven flowed through this online pond of 8 acres, Tim, 7, 8 acres, at Bayfield House Hotel. This is a sea trout river, but to get to spawning ground, the sea trout had to, in theory, get through that lake, plus a variety of other obstructions on the river. So Tim, working with the Norfolk Rivers Trust, with a guy called Professor Richard Hay, developed this project. It took years to get this to maturation. The Glaven ran through that culvert to bypass the lake. So this is what Tim was having to get around, was a river that was underground for 700 metres. And it had been so for some time, as that brick demonstrates. You may not be able to see that, but that says 1893, which is one of the bricks of that culvert. So they cut a whole new path for the stream around the lake, and that's it. 1.2 kilometres of wiggly stream working its way around Bayfield Lake. That's it. Tim Jacklin, the guy on the left, Richard Hay and Emily Long of the Norfolk Rivers Trust, with riffles in place, just ready to open the taps and let the river flow down. And that's what's happening there. The great and the good coming to see the great cut through that puts water into the channel. That's it, brand new. It's appreciate that it's still fairly bald and unvegetated. But instead of the Glaven flowing through this lake, you can see that it now runs as a proper stream, snaking its way past the lake. And if a sea trout wanted to, he could find his way around that. And in fact, reds appeared very quickly in this channel, didn't they?
Yeah, it was finished at the end of September, and there was spawning on it that autumn, and there's trout being caught out of it in April of this year.
Including by you. Sometimes the conservation officers, I think, their hearts must swell with pride. This too is a chalk stream. This is the Great Stour in Kent. There's only one of two. This is one of two photographs. Watch, there's a telegraph pole up there in the top right-hand corner. Okay, so this is what the Great Stour in Kent looked like in 2011, and then in a project where we scrounged some money out of the Nineveh Trust, the Sitter Trust, the local environment agency, and a quite well-heeled WTT member, we've worked over 3 phases to turn 2 kilometres of that stream into that stream. So that is that stream in May of this year. And you can see it's functioning like a proper little river, and it has indeed got proper little trout in it. And look, Andy chuffed with himself. I'd done that. And we also do an awful lot of talks, angling club type stuff. A gratuitous opportunity to introduce the Socha in Slovenia, only because I went there this year, to attend an event. So these are just some of the things. So we've gone to loads of conferences, spoken at lots of them. We've given talks to clubs scattered all over the country, from Inverness in the northeast of Scotland down to Dulverton in Somerset. Done a range of shows, but hopefully getting messages about sustainable fisheries management out to a big audience. One of those events was on the River Medlock in Manchester, where Paul Gaskill ran a Tenkara sort of teach-in for some kids from Manchester who are there shouting trout. That's actually what they're doing, shouting trout. I love that photograph, brilliant. That's a river that was lined in Accrington bricks since the early 19th century. And the Environment Agency have done a brilliant project to break it out of its brick shell and turn it into what's a really pretty looking stream. Oh, I don't know what's happened there. Oh, this is something about mayfly in the classroom. It did not quite work. But we've also run a project in the last year called Mayfly in the Classroom, which is sort of trying to take, using mayflies and the mayfly life cycle to teach kids about rivers. We took it to something like 1,000 kids in 40 settings, again scattered across the country. But the girl that was running it, Sue, has left us, and we're not planning to do anything with it at the moment. So I've just stuck it in mothballs for now while we focus on our main job. We also run an annual auction, and some of you are incredibly kind and donate to it, and that's run by our colleague Denise Ashton, who's cowering in the back wondering what I'm going to say about it. It has been the most extraordinary success for us. Last year, 2014, we had a record auction of 59 grand, and this year she only went and done it. She broke 70 grand, which is quite extraordinary. So to those of you that contribute lots, or indeed that bought lots like me, a great big thank you. We also produce an annual mag, Salmo Trutta. It's lying around. Please take copies as you wish, which Tim Jacklin edits each year, and I think it's a brilliant magazine. Really, really interesting read. And I think he should be immensely proud of that. And this year, we've added 2 full-time, pretty much, conservation officers to the far north of England. So we have Gareth, now full-time, based in Penrith, and Johnny Gray, based near Skipton. John Gray's post is a really interesting one because his title is Research and Conservation Officer. He's not just a conservation officer. And John, we've poached out of academia, Queen Mary University of London, and his role is going to be trying to turn science into stuff that we can understand. And I think that's a really critical role. So we'll use the WTT website, we'll use social media just to try and get messages out which hopefully the likes of me can make sense of. That's his primary role, and it's a good one. Hopefully it will work well. So for those guys in the far north, it would be really good if you could get to, if you haven't met them, get to meet Gareth and Johnny over today. Say hello. So this is what we're going to do this year, because we're into another year already. It's really just focusing on what we do and doing it well and doing it with value for money. We continue to get outstanding support from the Environment Agency, both in the central area, in the head office, using ROD licence money, and also some of the area teams, if they can still find any cash in the system, which God knows is getting tighter and tighter. I've said that already. We've also got a project running with Thames Water, where Thames Water are funding us to do work with local community groups. In 14-15 they funded that project for 50 grand. In 15-16 they're funding that project for £100,000. And that is about doing what we do in the Thames Water patch. It's a model that could be taken, in fact we are taking, to other water companies. Using Johnny to get out to more universities and colleges, and then, as I said already, to put expert info that we can understand on the WTT website. I said this last year and didn't do it. We're going to try and write a book. Well, actually Johnny's going to try and write a book. The Life of Trout. I think, for me, I think there's space in the market for a nice, readable, science-based but not science-y book on the biology and ecology of trout, and we will do that. It's what we haven't done. We've done most other things, but not yet a book. And also for us just to keep earning that dosh, fundamental oil in the cogs. And that's my lot. Thank you.